One of the best organized industries in the world is the aviation industry. At every point, there are safety measures to ensure that everything goes fine from takeoff to landing. Unfortunately, despite these measures, humanity has suffered some mishaps that leave the world with more questions than answers. One of such unfortunate mishaps in contemporary history was the Malaysian Air Flight 370, which disappeared completely from the radar on March 8, 2014. In that disaster, 227 passengers together with 12 crew members lost their lives, and none of their bodies have been recovered for burial till this day. It was one of the saddest happenings in the history of aviation. In this edition of Back in History, we present to you the history of this unfortunate disaster. Welcome to this edition of Back in History. The date was 8 March. The year was 2014. A massive passenger jet had just been prepared for a journey that most persons had booked way in advance. The plane was rolled up to the appropriate parking points to enable passengers board the jet for their anticipated journey. There was a call announcement for passengers at the waiting lounge of the airport to step forward for final clearance and boarding. The passengers filed into the plane and took their respective seats. Their luggage had already been taken into the cargo section of the plane. The engines of the plane were already steaming and ready to commence the journey. Everything was in place. The pilots and crew members were set for the journey. When everyone was inside and duly seated, the doors were shut. The plane then taxied on the runway, and upon receipt of the final clearance from the control tower, the plane took off and headed to its destination. The takeoff point was Kuala Lumpur International Airport in the capital of Malaysia, and the destination was Beijing Capital International Airport in China. Everything was just fine, and all 239 persons on board had hopes of safe arrival. As mere mortals, they were wrong. They never knew what was awaiting them. The flight was to disappear in the course of the journey, and the mortal bodies of the passengers were to be lost and lost forever. The takeoff time of the plane was 12:41 a.m. local time, and at 1:01 a.m. the plane had reached a cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. At exactly 1:07 a.m., the control tower received data of the performance of the aircraft from the Aircraft Communication Addressing and Reporting System ACARS of the plane. This is a normal routine in aviation. Planes are expected to communicate intermittently with the control tower. But this was the last communication from the plane to the control tower. Immediately, the aircraft reporting system made the said communication to the control tower at 1:07 a.m. The reporting system surprisingly switched off. This was an abnormal situation and a bad signal to the control tower. The operators of the control tower observed further, and at 1:19 a.m. there was a voice communication from the crew, and this happened to be the last recorded communication from the crew. At this point, a serious concern had been raised. While the air control tower was trying to understand what exactly was going on, the plane's transponder, that is, the device for receiving radio messages, was switched off at exactly 1:21 a.m., just as the plane was about to enter the Vietnamese airspace over the South China Sea. This was the last remaining communication link to the air traffic control. At this point, all communication channels to the plane had gone off. Nothing more was seen or heard about the plane by the air traffic control. It became clear at this point that all was not well and that something devastating was in the horizon. The control tower was alarmed, leading to the combination of efforts between the Malaysian military aviation experts and civilian experts to begin the tracking of the plane. Surprisingly, in the course of the tracking, the plane was seen turning around and then flying southwest over the Malay Peninsula, and in no time it turned to the northwest over the Strait Malacca. These events were clearly abnormal, and air traffic control was at a loss. The plane was no more on its route to Beijing. The Malaysian military air radar continued to track the plane till 2:22 a.m. when the military radar lost contact completely with the plane. At this point, it was clear that something devastating had occurred to the plane or was about to occur. All was not well. The switching off of the important gadgets in the plane, the termination of communication with the control tower, and the diversion of the plane from its route were signs of deliberate human interferences, but who exactly did the interference and for what purpose remains a mystery till today. Several questions were asked. Could it have been the pilot committing suicide? Could it have been that the plane was hijacked by terrorists or merchants of death? The more the questions, the fewer the answers. The plane was no more on the radar, and there was no further communication from the plane whatsoever. The simple implication in aviation science, therefore, was that something devastating had occurred to the plane. The next thing to be done was to embark on an intensive search for whatever might have remained of the plane. The initial search concentrated on the South Atlantic Sea. It then extended to the Strait of Malacca and to the Andaman Sea. Andaman Sea is a marginal sea of the northeastern Indian Ocean, bounded by the coastlines of Myanmar and Thailand. The search was expanded to Australia, Vietnam, and Central Asia, down to the western region of China. Huge volumes of water had been searched from top to bottom with the best available technologically advanced equipment. The best hands had been employed for the search. 1 week after, there was no trace of the plane. It was obvious at this point that the passengers and crew could not have been alive anymore. On March 24, 2014, the Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak announced to the world that based on the analysis of the final signals, experts had concluded that the flight crashed in a remote part of the Indian Ocean close to Australia, and that it was unlikely that anyone on board the plane was still alive. There was further search at the suspected location of the crash. Still, there was no trace of even the wreckage of the flight. From March 2014 to July 2014, nothing was heard or seen about the flight. At this time, it was clear and beyond all reasonable doubt that the occupants of the flight were no more alive. On 29th July 2014, the first suspected debris of the wanted plane was found on a beach at the French island of Réunion, more than 3,700 kilometers away from the Indian Ocean, where much of the search had been intensified. In subsequent months, more debris were found. Strangely, some were found on the shores of Tanzania in faraway Africa. Some debris were also found on the shores of Mozambique, South Africa, Madagascar, and Mauritius, all in Africa. 2 of the many pieces of the debris were confirmed to have emanated from the cabin interior of the plane, which was suggestive of the fact that the plane had broken into pieces, but whether the plane broke up in the air or on landing on the ocean surface could not be ascertained. With the discovery of the debris, the search team intensified their efforts around the areas and neighboring areas, but nothing more was discovered. There was no hope on the horizon. At this time, several days, weeks, and months had passed by, and the hope of any human survival was no more. Satisfied that it had done enough in the deployment of experts to embark on the search, the government of Malaysia called off the search for Flight 370. Australia and China also called off further search for the missing plane. At this point, the belly of the oceans had been thoroughly searched, and there was no hope to allow for further search. In the wake of the call of the respective governments, an American company, Ocean Infinity, made an application to the government of Malaysia for permission to continue with the search. Permission was granted by the government, but Ocean Infinity was also unable to make any discovery in their search. In July 2018, the government of Malaysia issued a final report on Flight 370's mysterious disappearance. In the report, mechanical malfunction of the plane was said to be extremely unlikely. It was rather noted that the change in flight path was an indication of human input. The switching off of the communication channels between the aircraft and the control tower was also suspicious of ill-intended human input. It was suspected that the pilots may have been on a suicide mission or self-induced mass murder. Hijacking was also suspected, but no group has claimed responsibility till this day. There was also the speculation that Flight 370 was shot down, but there was no confirmed evidence of shrapnels from a missile or other projectiles. The investigators, however, could not determine why the plane disappeared and could not be found despite the deployment of the best attainable hands and instruments in the search efforts. Of the 227 passengers on board the ill-fated plane, 153 passengers were Chinese citizens, including a group of 19 artists with 6 family members and 4 of their staff returning from a calligraphy exhibition of their work in Kuala Lumpur. 38 of the passengers were from Malaysia, while the remaining passengers were from 12 different countries of the world. All 227 passengers, together with 12 crew members, lost their lives in the most unimaginable way. Their bodies were not found to enable family members to take them for funeral. Malaysian Flight 370 remains till this day a mystery in aviation mishap. It is our prayer back in history that the souls of the departed passengers and crew members shall find repose in the sight of their Creator, even as we pray for family members to have consolation and closure. Thanks for watching this edition of Back in History, and do remember to subscribe to the channel or follow the page for regular notification on every new video. I remain your friend and host, Ekemini Udim.